So, my name is Itamar Haber. I'm a Redis geek and a DisQ freak. DisQ is a new project by Antirez. And I'm also a lunatic. In my spare time, I'm the chief developer advocatique at Redis Labs. And perhaps the most important thing that we want you to take away from today is that you sign up, if you haven't already, to our wonderful and amazing newsletter that comes out almost every other week. It's called Redis Watch, and it has a lot of Redis in it. We promise not to spam you. So Lua, what is Lua? To begin with, this is like copy-pasted from Lua's pages. So Lua is a powerful, fast and lightweight embeddable scripting language, which is exactly why I think Salvatore decided to put it into Redis. It's pronounced Lua, and in Portuguese it means moon. And please do not write it as Lua in uppercase. It's an acronym. It's an acronym. It's ugly and it confuses people. If you want to learn more about Lua, there's a whole web page or a whole website about it. What's a lunatic? Because I said I'm a lunatic. So the lunatic word is actually a mentally ill person, not a technical definition. It's not used by psychiatrists, but it's a mentally ill person who acts absurdly or as an eccentric, and as a verb, of course, or an adjective, you can say about something that is pure lunacy. The origin is, of course, from Middle English, which comes from French and so forth, up to Latin, where luna is, of course, the moon, and they're once used to believe that the moon causes insanity. So I think that luaphobia or lunaphobia or solenophobia, as the medical term perhaps defines it, is pure lunacy. That is, if you're not using Lua because you're afraid of Lua, or you think that Lua isn't that strong, you prefer perhaps Python, Basic, Java, I don't know, that's not a reason not to use Lua. It may be not the prettiest thing, or it may be a bit ugly, but it's better having it than not having it all. And my personal sin is that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I try to do everything with Lua, even when it shouldn't be done. So don't take everything I say about Lua, just the good parts. I do want to take you through a very, very short introduction to Lua, a very short primer, just 2 pages, 2 slides, not very loaded. The first slide here shows you a basic Lua program, a Lua script. I actually wrote it. And it shows most of what Lua can do, by the way. These 5 lines, out of which 3 is a comment. So you do have comments in Lua, and you can actually do multi-line strings or even multi-line comments using this little syntax here. You can see in the 4th line a definition of a variable. Variables are defined just like that. The special keyword local means that this variable is local to the context of execution of that script. And in Redis, we only allow local variables and local functions. This is so every Lua script is a sort of encapsulated in itself and doesn't require the state to be kept by the server's context. What I'm doing here is defining a variable, but the variable itself is actually one of Lua's data types, or perhaps one of the most important data types in Lua. It's called a table, which is exactly what you'd expect it to be. It's a sort of dictionary, but it's also an array, a very flexible and interesting data structure. And besides that, you can have all sorts of data types and values like integers or strings, or the nil value, which means no value, or a Boolean value, and so forth. It also offers, Lua that is, offers a way to do loops, to do control structures such as if then else. So everything here is included, and you can really start doing basically whatever you need to do with Redis and Lua. So that was primer number 1. Primer number 2, which I did want to mention, you don't need to memorize the entire thing. Lua brings the notion of libraries, just like other languages do. And Redis comes with a pre-packed pack of languages that you can use. Lua has much more than that, but Redis restricts your actions. So it comes only with these libraries. You have a few core libraries. Up until recently, we had 5. Then we switched or lost the 5th one, the debug library, and we just have the 4 basic ones. Also, a few other helpers are included, helper libraries, most notably beat-up, which lets you do beat operations on numbers, and the C message pack and C JSON, which are C implementations for Lua, or C bindings, or whatever, that allows you basically to pack, unpack, serialize, and deserialize these protocols. And then the most important library in Redis's Lua is called Redis. There's a library called Redis, which basically lets you either call a Redis command from your Lua script or do all kinds of things like log something to the log file or maybe return an error and so forth. And as of version 3.2.1, we got a bunch of new commands that are used from the Lua API. I'll expand on these in a minute. Oh, I don't have anyone who shows me the time, so I guess, well, I'll be right. So, but this isn't a crash course into Lua. I'm not going to teach you Lua. You can do that yourself. I've put here what I've used to learn Lua. This is perhaps my most helpful resource, redis.io/command/Lua. Everything is written there. And if it isn't, just edit. It's open source. You can add to it whatever you think needs to be added. But it's also very, very helpful to go ahead and write and read the full manual. And if you really want to, there's this cute little thing that I'm trying to copy and adjust and modify for Redis, but it works just as well just to get to know to Lua. It's a script in Lua that basically does the same thing that I did in the couple of slides ago. It goes through Lua in Lua and shows you how to use Lua, and you can run it and see how it works. Just to understand what Lua is, and I'm repeating what Salvatore said earlier, I prepared this very, very poor and not to scale analogy just to give you the gist of what we're trying to do. So your client is at one end of the network and it connects to Redis, a remote dictionary server, through some kind of intermediate layer, a network. And this is Redis, this is your sun, the earth is your code, and you're trying to move data back and forth and commands back and forth. Lua lets you do it by encapsulating all the commands in one sort of an atomic, coherent way that you can just drop very, very efficiently towards your moon, back and forth. How does that work? So what would you use Lua for? You would use Lua for 3 main use cases that I can think of. The first and perhaps the most important one is performance. So there are ways, or rather use cases, where you could really benefit just from using Lua in terms of performance. And this is because your Lua scripts are actually, first you can use them, or the recommended way to use them is by caching them in the database. So Redis allows you to do that. You upload and cache your scripts into the database, and then you just call the script by its cached name as SHA-1 sum of its name, of its contents. And these encompass multiple operations. So it's a way to reduce the traffic between your application and between the database, because instead of writing a lot of commands to tell Redis to do something, you just ask it to run this script, this very short named script, 32 characters or whatever it is, and then it does it. So you traffic less on the wire. But it's not only that, you got the ability to do whatever you want in Lua. It accepts multiple keys or none. The script, that is, can accept multiple keys or none and multiple arguments or none. So you could actually use it to compose whatever kind of logic you want. And the server-side operation actually allows you to do a lot of things on the server where the data is, with exclusive access to the data. So if you want, for example, the most common example, imagine you have a list of numbers, doesn't matter how you store it, and all you want to do is just get the sum of the numbers. One way to do it is to ask Redis, bring me these numbers, and I'll sum them at the client. But I don't really need all the numbers. I just need one number, one big number that represents the total. So if there was a way to ask Redis to do that, I can save on sending me all these numbers. And this is exactly what I can do with Lua. I can sum them server side and just reply with the response. So as a use case for how you use Lua to perhaps augment, change the way Redis behaves and maybe save a little, I took, for example, a recent project that I worked on. It's called GeoLua. It's work in progress. It's a set of helper scripts in Lua that are geared to support an upcoming feature in Redis, the geoset indices. So there's a lot of things I put there. I tried to play with it. And one of the things I did is I actually wrote a new function in Lua, or rather developed my own very function in Lua. And before I explain what the function does, I'll talk about what it tries to address. So the Geo API that's coming out has this very neat command. It's called GeoDist. So the idea is you store coordinates on the world, and then you can ask Redis for this set of coordinates, please give me the distance, and you can actually say in what units, but please give me the distance between two members, which is kind of cool because that way you can always know what's the distance between you and someone else or any point of interest. However, this command, for example, is what we call a non-variadic command. It only accepts this fixed syntax, one key, two elements, that's it. So I said, what if you want to compute perhaps a longer distance between a few members, maybe a path? What you do is you need to call this command repeatedly, once for each segment in your path, and then once you have everything, you can sum it up. And there are ways to do it more efficiently in Redis. It's called pipelining, but still you have to do the same command multiple times just to get a bunch of numbers and sum them. So my geopathlen alias or script does exactly that. It just calls in a loop repeatedly for every element geodist, but it reduces the traffic on the wire because I only send this command once instead of sending a million elements and try a million geodist commands. So this is one very common use case for Lua. The other use case for Lua is actually it's much more powerful, and it's basically doing transactions, not just as a way to take shortcuts or like bunch a few commands together or even reduce your bandwidth, but basically just encapsulating a series of operations as an atomic logic. That is exactly what Lua gives you, because Redis Lua scripts run from beginning to end without halting for anyone, and they block the database as they run, so nothing can change it. They're fully atomic. You got your comments, you got your variables, you can do everything there. Every piece of logic you want to actually implement, you can do there. And as a sort of recipe, because it's not intuitive. It took me time to understand that this is actually a real transaction, because what you can do is you get the name of the script inside the script that's running. You get the keys, you get the arguments, you can do all your assertions and verifications on the data and the business logic before you even start. Then you can read a bunch of data, do your computations, see if everything fits, all your conditions are fulfilled, then you write everything and return with success. Otherwise, just break with an error and say, I can't do it, the transaction failed. So you got this entire thing wholly covered in Redis. Very, very powerful. The third use case for Lua scripts, and this is what I wouldn't like you to take away perhaps, or just, take it at your own risk, is you can actually build your own patentable or your own creations, innovations like APIs and data structures. Anything that Redis lacks inherently could be perhaps modeled in Lua. So I told you about GeoLua, which is my latest project. So in GeoLua, I took the liberty and not just invented a new similar command like geopathlen, which is basically a variadic form of geodist. I also did other things. So the first thing I did was I implemented this command. It's called geodel. Geodel actually removes a point from your sorted set. Because Redis has the zram command, we don't have a geodel command, but it is sort of an internal joke, and it shows how you can implement your own command. Another thing I implemented there is called an XYZ set, which is basically two data structures melded together. because geosets only let you keep an X and Y coordinate, and I wanted to give you also an attitude or the altitude to signify the height. So this is done in Lua, and perhaps, and also support for GeoJSON, which currently doesn't really work. But the most ambitious thing I did was the GEORADIUS, and this perhaps merits even an animation. So Redis brings to the table with Geo API the ability to search in a radius. You give it a point, and it searches for other points in a radius from that point outwards. Sometimes you want to search by polygons and not necessarily by a circle. You want to say whatever falls inside that polygon interests me. And Redis doesn't let you do that with its basic API. So I took Lua and extended it and wrote a few scripts to do it. The thing it does, basically, the algorithm, is I invented yet another data structure. I call it the GeoMash. The GeoMash is basically a hash, a Redis hash, that just stores geometries. A polygon can be stored as a line of as points that define the polygon. So I store these points, the definition of the polygon, in a GeoMash. Then when you ask me to search, I read the definition of that polygon from the GeoMash and draw it. Then I compute the bounding box for that polygon, that is the bounding box for that polygon. Then we go ahead and we compute or rather ask Redis to do a radius search from the bounding box's center and to one, using the diagonal as my radius. This gives me a lot of points that fall inside the circle, but most certainly also points in my polygon. So then I run a quick filter and just throw away everything that is outside the polygon's bounding box, a bug in the animation up there, as you can see. And then I run another filter. Once I've filtered a lot of points, I run another filter. It's called P and Poly, which uses a sort of a semi-infinite ray. It like tries to see for every point, it goes like this and tries to see how many edges it traverses, and that if there's an odd number of edges, it means that the point is outside the polygon. And it also works with polygons with holes and a bunch of other things. So it was a very cool experiment to try. But Lua isn't just, fun. It's not just green cheese over there. There are a few disadvantages to Lua. Perhaps the most notable one is massive number crunching. You don't want to do that in Lua, and Salvatore mentioned his indexing API, the redimension API that he was working on. I took his API and actually he wrote it in Ruby. I ported it to Lua, and I thought we'd see some kind of an improvement in performance, because instead of doing all the computation of indexes outside the server in the Ruby script, we're currently doing it in the server. The search is done in the server. I thought it would be faster. Turned out it wasn't, so Lua is kind of sucky when it comes to performance or long computations, number crunching. There are a few beefs that it depends on what other programming languages you use, but like the operators, there's no ternary operator, which is basically A equals B or C if something, or rather, if B then A equals A, whatever. If you know what I'm talking about, you know about it. There's no split function for the strings. There's no zip function method on table. All kinds of weird things that you say, what? Like, I have it all over the place. Why do I have to suffer? Only 32-bit operations, so you're limited in that. Accessing the data in Redis itself is not totally inexpensive. It costs actually. The context switch that when you call Redis and you say, Redis, bring me this value because I want to do something in Lua, it takes time, takes memory, takes resources. So it's not like a magic bullet. And there are a few quirks that you have to be aware of, like Redis doesn't have a double data type. So if you return a double from Lua to Redis, an automatic conversation will like turn it into an integer, and you lose the fractional part, which, if you're not expecting, could be weird. In Redis version 3.2, however, one of the greatest things that's going to happen is the fact that Lua is going to get a few features. Salvatore mentioned them, so I'll just review them very quickly. After a long time of developing in Lua in Redis, I finally did something very naughty. I came up like 6 months ago in October at London and said, listen, we must have a debugger. It's inhumane to actually code even 3 lines without a debugger. I wasn't the first one who asked for a debugger, a Lua debugger in Redis, but I was definitely the last one, because after I asked so nicely, Salvatore conceded, and like in 5 days, he whipped out the thing and it worked. I was like foolish enough to be impatient and not wait these 5 days, and actually did the redimension port without the debugger. So that's the last time I didn't use a debugger. But right now we have a debugger, an integrated debugger that can be used wherever you have Redis. And we also worked with Zero Brain, which is a graphical IDE for Lua, free, open source. And we've developed a Redis plugin for it, so you can actually use both just as well. And there are blog posts and video casts, and just feel free to use it. Another major change in Lua in version v3.2 is the manner of replication. We used to replicate entire scripts. Up until version 3.2, the idea was that if you would look at this kind of code, which is basically a loop that repeats 100 times and increments some keys, if I was to send 100 increment commands down to the slave, it would have been more wasteful rather than just sending this elegant script and telling the slave, please do it for me. However, this has some disadvantages. Most notably, it's wasteful if you're doing the same computation for long computation over and over again. It takes a long time to recover sometimes from persistency. So in Redis version 3.2, we get 2 neat presents. One of them is effect-based replication. We can actually tell Redis, stop replicating the script as itself, just start replicating the commands or the transformation that it does on the data. The other thing that we can do, we can actually tell Redis, all right, from now on in the script, I want you to stop replicating at all, because I'm doing stuff that is temporary. I don't need it to be replicated to slaves. Or you can say, I want this from this point onwards just to write to persistent storage and not to slaves, and all kinds of fine granularity levels that weren't available earlier, and should become very, very helpful. And of course, the prize is the fact that once you start working with effects-based replication rather than scripts that contain the logic, and I'm repeating what Salvatore said, I didn't know he's going to say it, so I prepared the slide, I'm not going to lose it. You can actually call non-deterministic random commands like time from your script and write, and you won't get a nasty error. It's almost the end. I just wanted to mention that the future is bright. Currently, we're working with Redis, in Redis with Lua version 5.1.5, which is almost over 4 years old. There are newer versions. The one out there is 5.3.2. Since there are no major changes between the language between the versions, there are changes, more than enough internally, but the language itself stayed almost the same, and it looks pretty safe to upgrade, so it's expected to happen soon. And I do want to warn you that although Lua is future compatible in the sense that we are going to upgrade it and it's going to be maintained, some things are better left undone. I've put together a list of my favorite script that died over the years. Infospect was a collector for the info command that kept the info command inside Redis, and you could probably do anything with it, but then it turned impossible because info is random and you can't run it from scripts. Now we can run it with the new replication mode though. Hitman used to kill idle connections, but at some point in some commit, it also turned invalid because it's an admin command and killing a client can't be done from a script. My personal favorite, the Redis Lua debugger, is a Lua script that debugs Lua scripts in Redis. After we removed the debug library, it became impossible to use it, but yeah, we got the LDB, the Lua debugger, and it's much better. And thank you all for coming here. And thank you, and stick around. We have a lot more today.